Imagine why millions of people over millennia have not recognized Jesus as the promised Messiah. What would be behind such a strong rejection? Is it just a matter of belief or something deeper? In this video, we will delve into the origins of this complex separation between Christianity and Judaism. Why, to this day, do the Jews look forward to another Messiah and consider the idea of the Trinity unacceptable? And more intriguingly, what does it really mean to be the Son of God within a faith that has always seen God as one and indivisible? Buckle up, because what comes next will challenge everything you've ever heard about the roots of these two religions. Imagine yourself in the heart of an ancient synagogue centuries ago, surrounded by rabbis, scholars, and religious leaders fervently debating the nature of God, a belief so deep, rooted in thousands of years of tradition, where an absolute and non-negotiable truth echoes in every corner. God is one, indivisible, eternal, and transcendent. This belief, strict monotheism, is the central pillar of Judaism. But then something happens that threatens to shake those foundations. A new message emerges, a revolutionary idea that suggests that God, the creator of all things, could manifest as man. And that idea, my friends, would change the course of history forever. To understand why most Jews did not accept Jesus as the Son of God, we need to go back to the fundamental concept that forms the backbone of Judaism, strict monotheism. For the Jews, God is unique, immutable, and absolutely transcendent. The idea that he could divide himself into three, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, as Christianity proposes, was and still is utterly unacceptable. Imagine that you live in a society where, for generations, your ancestors fought to preserve this vision of a single God. Centuries of history and identity have been built around this unbreakable belief. And suddenly, someone comes along saying that God can have a son on earth. For the Jews of that time, this statement was seen as sacrilege, a violation of the very concept of divinity. Christianity, on the other hand, introduced the concept of the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. But for Judaism, this was inconceivable. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob was indivisible. The attempt to divide God, even metaphorically, through Jesus' incarnation as a man, was an idea that went against everything the Jews believed about the divine nature. Now, imagine the impact of this divergence. On the one hand, a religious tradition that fought against numerous external influences to preserve the purity of monotheism. On the other, a new emerging faith, full of hope and promises of salvation, which said that God had sent his Son to redeem humanity. The collision of these two worldviews was inevitable, but it wasn't just the idea of division that bothered them. God's incarnation as a man also generated revulsion among the Jews. To them, God was completely separate from the material world. He was incorporeal, not subject to the limitations of flesh, time, and space. The idea that God could lower himself to a human form seemed, to the Jews, not only wrong but almost blasphemous. How could such a perfect and transcendent being become a man, walk among us, feel hunger, pain, and tiredness? And this is where the great separation between Christians and Jews begins. Christianity celebrates the idea that Jesus, being God incarnate, came to save humanity. But for Jews, this concept never made sense. To believe in a God who could be touched, wounded, and crucified was completely contrary to his conception of divinity. So what we have here is a battle of ideas, a collision of theological worlds that would shape the fate of billions of people over the centuries. On the one hand, the strict monotheism of Judaism, which saw God as unattainable and completely separate from humanity. On the other, the Christian vision of a God who not only became man, but did so to save us all. This fundamental difference is what separates these two great religious traditions to this day. And so, the question remains, how can such a powerful idea, which transformed the world, be so incompatible with another that has also shaped the fates of millions? Imagine yourself in Jerusalem, walking through the streets of the old city. The people murmur expectantly, their eyes fixed on the prophecies that for generations have fueled their hope. They eagerly await the arrival of a leader, not just any leader, but the Messiah, the one who, according to the scriptures, would be a descendant of the great King David, a man sent by God to restore Israel's glory, bring world peace, and rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. It is a moment of tension, of longing for liberation, a deep desire for national and spiritual redemption. However, when Jesus appeared on the scene, a new wave of interpretations of the Messiah emerged, creating a watershed between the two largest religious traditions in the world, Judaism and Christianity. For the Jews, the expectation was clear. The Messiah was to be human, not divine, and his mission was concretely linked to the restoration of Israel. The Messiah would come to lead the Jewish people through times of turmoil, reuniting the scattered tribes, bringing lasting peace, and most importantly, rebuilding the temple, the spiritual heart of Israel. All this should happen in life, visible to all as proof of his mission. However, for Jesus' followers, he was the promised Messiah, but his mission was not earthly in nature. It was spiritual. They believed that Jesus came to save humanity from its sins, not to lead a political revolution. The kingdom he preached was the kingdom of heaven, not a physical restoration of Israel. And here lies the first great shock of expectations. Imagine you, living in that time, hearing about a man who performed miracles and spoke of a kingdom that was not of this world. Many Jews, especially those oppressed by the Roman occupation, expected a warrior Messiah, someone who would deliver Israel with might and might. But Jesus did not lead armies. He did not take the throne from David, and the temple remained in ruins. For the Jews of the time, these signs were clear. Jesus could not be the Messiah. The expectation was not fulfilled. The Jewish rejection of Jesus as Messiah is therefore deeply rooted in these fundamental differences. The Jewish Messiah would be a powerful man, and his mission, in addition to being spiritual, would also be political and social. Jesus' failure to carry out these visible messianic promises, such as world peace and the rebuilding of the temple, was one of the main reasons why the Jews of the time did not accept him as such. Now, imagine yourself as a follower of Jesus, believing that the true meaning of the Messiah transcends what many had imagined. For Christians, Jesus is the Messiah, not because he fulfilled earthly expectations, but because he brought spiritual salvation, something that many believed to be the true purpose of messianic prophecy. The crucifixion, which for the Jews was a symbol of failure, became, for the Christians, the definitive proof of their redemptive sacrifice. On the other hand, for the Jews, the idea of a crucified Messiah was totally unthinkable. Crucifixion was a punishment reserved for the worst criminals. How could Israel's deliverer, David's promised seed, be humiliated in this way? The figure of the Messiah, for Judaism, could never be associated with such a defeat. And so, the great difference between the two religions begins to become more and more evident. Jews continue to await a Messiah who will bring physical and national redemption, someone who will come to reunite Israel and establish peace in the world. Meanwhile, Christians see Jesus as a fulfillment of messianic prophecy, but in a spiritual way, one that transcends earthly expectations. This divergence over the concept of Messiah is undoubtedly one of the biggest reasons why Christianity and Judaism have gone such different ways. 2,000 years later, these differences still profoundly shape the beliefs and practices of each tradition, spawning theological debates and divergent interpretations that remain at the heart of the two religions. What really defines a Messiah? The one who leads with power and restores a nation, or the one who sacrifices his own life in the name of a greater, more spiritual redemption? It is this question that remains at the heart of the differences between Judaism and Christianity. In the dusty alleys of Nazareth, the story of Jesus begins to unfold in an atmosphere of simplicity and humility. Mary, a young woman, is visited by an angel, bringing the news of an extraordinary conception. However, for Judaism, this narrative is surrounded by controversy and misunderstanding. Judaism does not accept the idea of the virginal conception as an absolute truth. For them, Jesus is not seen as a divine entity, but as an ordinary human being, a Jew like many others. The concept of a divine being born of a virgin woman is profoundly contrary to the Jewish belief that God is incorporeal and unchanging. For the Jews, God cannot incarnate in a human being. The idea that the creator of the universe would become a limited being, susceptible to pain and death, challenges the traditional understanding of his transcendent nature. This view is fundamental to Jewish identity, and so the narrative of Jesus' childhood is often viewed with skepticism. While Christians celebrate the birth of Jesus as a miracle and the manifestation of God's love, Jews perceive it differently. They recognize the historical figure of Jesus, but they do not see him as a Messiah or a divine manifestation. Jesus is treated as an important rabbi and prophet, but not as the Son of God. His humanity is emphasized, underscoring the belief that all human beings are equal before God. Jewish traditions do not contemplate the notion that a man could be divine. Judaism teaches that all human beings have the potential to come closer to God through righteous actions and practices, rather than through the divinity of a single individual. This view shapes the Jewish understanding of salvation and the relationship with the Creator. In addition, the birth in Bethlehem, surrounded by humble circumstances and with the presence of shepherds, contrasts with the image of a powerful and majestic leader that many expected. The promised Messiah was to come in a setting of great splendor and glory, not in a stable. The Hebrew scriptures speak of a Messiah who would be a powerful and respected leader, not someone who would grow up in an ordinary family, far from the big cities and political power. This disparity between messianic expectations and the reality of Jesus' birth intensifies the rejection of his role as Messiah. The origin and birth of Jesus are a crucial part of the Christian narrative, but for Judaism, these stories don't fit the frame of what they expected. This fundamental difference between the two traditions continues to influence views about Jesus and his mission. Thus, while Christians see God's incarnation in Jesus as an act of love and redemption, Jews remain steadfast in their beliefs, awaiting a Messiah who, according to their expectations, is yet to come. At the heart of Jewish tradition is the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, a collection of sacred texts that have shaped the identity and faith of the Jewish people over the centuries. For Jews, every word and verse in this ancient textbook has a deep and essential meaning, reflecting a unique and personal relationship with God. When it comes to Jesus, the interpretation of these scriptures becomes a point of intense divergence. While Christians interpret several Old Testament passages as prefigurations of Jesus' coming, Jews look at these same scriptures and see a narrative that does not point to him. Verses that Christians consider prophecies about the Messiah, such as those in Isaiah, are viewed by Jews in a completely different way. For them, these passages speak of a future Messiah who has not yet arrived, someone who will bring peace, justice, and reunite the people of Israel. The idea that Jesus could be this figure is therefore something that does not align with his beliefs. Judaism holds that the messianic prophecies are yet to be fulfilled. The expectation of a Messiah who will restore Israel and usher in an era of world peace is a central aspect of the Jewish faith. For Jews, the coming of a God-anointed leader is a long-awaited event, and this hope is reflected in their daily prayers and practices. The notion that Jesus fulfilled these prophecies is not only rejected, but considered a misinterpretation of tradition. In addition, belief in the Trinity and the divinity of Jesus conflicts with the Jewish understanding of God. Judaism teaches that God is an indivisible unity, a fundamental concept that permeates its theology. This idea of a single, transcendent God is crucial, and any interpretation that suggests a division of God's nature is unacceptable. Thus, the Christian view of Jesus as the Son of God and part of a Trinity is seen as a radical break with the essence of Jewish monotheism. Differences in scriptural interpretation also reflect a deep respect for text and tradition. For Jews, the analysis and discussion of sacred texts is a way to connect with the spiritual heritage. Criticism and exegesis are revered practices, where rabbis and scholars are dedicated to understanding every nuance of words. This contrasting approach to the acceptance of the Christian narrative highlights the richness of interfaith dialogue, where each tradition seeks to understand the other. In the end, the relationship between Judaism and the figure of Jesus is complex and multifaceted. While Christians see in Jesus the fulfillment of prophecies and the promise of salvation, Jews remain anchored in their messianic traditions and expectations, awaiting a future that has not yet materialized. Thus, divergence in scriptural interpretations is one of the pillars that support the separation between these two great faith traditions. Messianic prophecies have a prominent place in both Judaism and Christianity, but their interpretations reveal a deep gulf between the two traditions. For Jews, these prophecies not only outline the hope of a future Messiah, but also the expectation of an era of peace and justice that is yet to come. The idea of a God-anointed leader who will gather the people of Israel, restore sovereignty, and establish a world free of war and conflict is a fundamental anchor of the Jewish faith. In contrast, Christians see in Jesus the fulfillment of these prophecies, believing that he fulfilled each of the promises contained in the Scriptures. However, this view is widely contested by Jews, who claim that Jesus did not meet messianic expectations. During his lifetime, Jesus did not bring world peace, nor did he rebuild the temple, nor did he unify the people of Israel. Thus, for Jews, the belief that he is the Messiah is seen as a misinterpretation of the Holy Scriptures. The most striking divergence is in relation to the passages that Christians believe refer to Jesus, such as those of Isaiah and Psalms. For Jews, these passages are not promises of a Messiah already coming, but rather visions of a future not yet realized. The expectation that the Messiah will bring national redemption and the reestablishment of the temple in Jerusalem remains alive in Jewish prayers and traditions. The Jews claim that the prophecies are destined for a glorious future that was not fulfilled by Jesus. In addition, many Jews argue that the Christian interpretation of prophecies is often taken out of its original context. They believe that the meaning of Scripture should be understood in light of the tradition and history of the Jewish people, rather than from a perspective that developed later. This critique highlights the importance of respecting the single narrative that has shaped Jewish identity over the centuries. The separation between Jewish and Christian interpretations of prophecy is not only theological, but also historical. Over the centuries, tensions between the two traditions have resulted in misunderstandings and hostilities. Allegations that Jews were responsible for Jesus' death, for example, fueled animosity and persecution. This contributed to the formation of a Jewish identity that, in many ways, defined itself in opposition to Christianity. Thus, the discussion of messianic prophecies is not just a matter of belief, but a reflection on the history, tradition, and identity of each religion. While Christians see in Jesus the light that redeems humanity, Jews remain steadfast in their expectation of a Messiah who will bring true redemption, unite the people, and restore world peace. This tension between the two visions is one of the many threads that make up the rich and complex fabric of interactions between Judaism and Christianity. The crucifixion of Jesus is one of the most significant events in religious history, reverberating profoundly in both Christianity and Judaism. For Christians, the cross is a symbol of redemption and divine love. It represents the supreme sacrifice that Jesus made for humanity, believing that through his death he paid the price for the sins of the world. However, this perspective is widely rejected in Judaism, where crucifixion does not possess the same theological and spiritual relevance. In the Jewish context, the idea of a Messiah who would be crucified runs counter to the expectation of a triumphant leader who would restore Israel and bring peace. The Jews, throughout their history, have waited for a Redeemer who would free them from oppression and bring them a future of security and dignity. The crucifixion, therefore, is seen as an event that not only fails to meet these expectations, but also casts a shadow over the figure of Jesus. For many, death on the cross is not an act of heroism, but rather a tragedy that did not fulfill messianic promises. In addition, the relationship between Christians and Jews over the centuries has been marked by conflicts and hostilities. During the Middle Ages, the claim that Jews were responsible for Jesus' death became one of the main stigmas, leading to violent persecution and the marginalization of Jewish communities. Jews were often wrongly accused of deicide, an accusation that had devastating consequences, resulting in massacres and expulsions. These injustices left deep scars and contributed to the construction of a resilient Jewish identity, which was defined in part by resistance to oppression. Even today, historical and theological tensions between the two religions continue to echo. The rejection of the cross as a symbol of salvation is not just a matter of religious belief, but a reminder of the suffering and ongoing struggle of Jews in the face of persecution. For many, this story is not only about the past, but also about the need to build a future in which differences are respected and where peaceful coexistence is possible. However, it is essential to recognize that, despite the differences, there is a space for dialogue and understanding. The new generations of Jews and Christians are striving to dismantle prejudices and build bridges. The rejection of the cross and the scars of persecution need not be permanent barriers, but rather starting points for conversations about faith, hope, and a common future. As we reflect on this complex relationship, we are invited to consider how narratives of the past can shape the realities of the present while inspiring us to create a more just and compassionate tomorrow.